invoices that we receive from the contractor through his subs and suppliers. One thing that is critical in construction is that we are not only responsible to verify and check the subcontractor's cost, but for example, an electrical subcontractor, he may have a contract with us or through the general contractor of 2.2 million, but he's going to have a supplier that might be 800,000. So we need to make sure that that supplier and his information is being gathered so that we know how much money is being expended in those areas. So we're looking at second and third tier for suppliers too. Owner's contingency, this is our documentation to be able to track and keep an idea of where we're at on contingency. This is the authorization form to allow a contractor to move forward on any additional information or things that we need to expend, owner change, owner addition to a building. And this comes out of the contingency money that the board approves when we approve the CMA, the construction process. On 927 is the owner's contingency worksheet. So this is a way for us to be able to track the project. One important thing about this is that it really lets us know if there's any concern about us coming close to our overall contract amount. So as we start spending money, I mean, when I start seeing maybe 15 and 20 and 25%, we're really going to start having some serious meetings to talk about where we're at on the project. If we're further along toward the end, it's not as critical, but if we're early on, we really need to go back in and have meetings with the contractor and the design team to see where we're at to make sure we don't have a problem. And then 928, we're getting into our construction change order, and this is actually tracks the actual document and gets specifically about describing what the work is and the approval process.
So a couple of takeaways that I'd just like to reaffirm here on on the pay applications, pages 9.19 through 9.25. One of the things we always do is we hold back retainage on all payments, and that's 5%. And so if the invoice is $100 and we verify it and it's bona fide, we pay $95. And that 5% is sort of our own surety, as Tom was talking about. So as we go down the road, we make sure things are finished. And sometimes, unfortunately, sometimes the money is the only thing you have as sort of a carrot in front of someone to get them to do the work. We try to avoid those kind of folks, but sometimes it's unfortunate we get them. On the owner's contingency authorization form, I'd like to point out that currently the approval of contingency expenditures requires approval from the Director of Design and Construction. That's actually on page 9.26. And then on 9.29, I'd like to point out something there regarding change orders. At the bottom of that page 9.29, you can see where it says that we need a signature by Fort Bend Independent School District Board of Trustees or an E-team member. So let me explain that. If the cost is within the construction contract or inside the GMP, change orders require E-team approval. In other words, if y'all authorize a spend of a certain amount, as long as we're within that amount, we can approve change orders. If we go outside of that amount, then the board has to approve those change orders. That's the way this is currently structured. The last thing I want to talk about construction phase is on the last bullet up here is building commissioning. Building commissioning agents make sure that we get what we pay for. They go through and through a series of checks and inspections, make sure that we get what we paid for and everything is functioning as designed. Now, it is a requirement of LEED, but in my opinion, whether we are going to do LEED or not, building commissioning is a best practice, I think, as we go forward, and that'd be something to really take a strong look at. Okay, moving from construction phase to capital planning. As y'all know, PASA will update the annual demographic data every year prior to winter break, and then we will, as a staff, put it into our project planning template to see how things have changed from the previous year with regard to our utilization at different campuses. The other key point here is we originally thought that we were going to maintain the MAPS database, which is the Jacobs database, and you can see up there it stands for Magellan Assessment and Project Planning System, or the MAPS database. We originally thought that was going to be a facilities issue and a facilities maintained database. But as we moved forward and thought about it and worked through it, we believe that is actually a design and construction process, and Peter Clark is going to be our lead man on that, sitting in the design and construction assistant director seat. Handout 10, just very quickly, handout 10 shows you a facilities condition detail from Austin Parkway, and we chose that Austin Parkway because that was the first one, alphabetical order. Nothing in particular why we chose Austin Parkway, but that is just an actual screenshot from the database, and that's the source data for all the bond planning we've been doing, and that's Alan Bassam was able to extract that data, and then Sean Bogle was able to do the spreadsheet work on it. And then 10.2 is just a deficiency list that was generated by the RS means estimation process to come to the different amounts for the various deficiencies. Oh, something, okay. Regarding land purchases, the first thing we do is we try to triangulate the demographic information and land availability. And what I mean by that is, the demographer might put a pin on a map and say, I need a school right here. And that's all well and good, but then when we go out and look for land, we can only find land where it's available. So we actually try to make an assessment of where it's available and suit the demographer or the land needs as best as we can. And the last couple of land deals we did, I really appreciate Dr. Dupree's leadership and y'all's willingness to go forward with the way we did this. By issuing that non-binding letter of intent, it gives the seller a true sense that when we come to them that we really are interested. It's kind of like having a surety in your hand when you go to the seller and say, here's a bona fide offer. Regarding environmental site assessment, that's a very standard prescriptive process where to do environmental conditions on a specific site. But we actually take it a little step further than the environmental site assessment, and we also look at soil conditions, take a look at if there's any kind of geological faults in the area, are utilities available, and making sure that drainage is available. And like Tom said, a couple of years ago, the department had to do a study with the FAA to determine athletic pole heights for a particular site. So, future considerations. The RFQ for the design professionals for the 2014 bond, we are working on a document. What our preference and what our plan is that we're going to solicit all of the professional services in one solicitation: architects, civil engineers, structural engineers, mechanical engineers, testing and balancing folks, all the professional design construction professionals in one solicitation. Also, the RFQ for the construction manager agent or program manager is also in draft form, and we'll be talking more about that. We'll be talking about our approach and some of our strengths and weaknesses and why we think our approach will be good on selecting that. We have an actual agenda item, a review item later, so we won't dwell on that. Also need to consider bond-funded positions should the bond pass. We will most likely need a bond buyer and some type of a bond purchasing clerk due to the additional workload with all that. They already have their existing workload, and then if you put $484 million additional dollars of purchasing on top of that justifies a bond buyer and a purchasing clerk. And then small business initiative. I don't want to steal Ms. Morris's thunder. She's going to talk about the small business initiative tonight. But then from that, we need to take those tenants and roll it into the the criteria that we showed you earlier on and see how that affects the evaluation criteria. Also, there'll be some more information about the subcontractor expo also coming from Mickey. And then, as Ms. James said earlier on, we want to, thank you. We want to kind of end up where we started and talk about measures of success. And there's certainly more measures of success than this, but absolutely, delivering a project on time and within budget would be a measure of success for this department. But so is energy or resource-efficient buildings and maintenance-friendly buildings for the people that have to maintain them for the next 50 years. And so that concludes our presentation at 47 minutes.
Ding, 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 ding. Thank you very much, Mr. Cleaver, and Mr. Cooper. That was very, very good. That was a lot of information, and I'm sure we have some stunned trustees and maybe some with questions, if they can find their words. Mr. Rosenthal.
Thank you, guys. That was great. And I'm glad to see that 46 is moving. It's interesting to see all the notes on here, how it's proceeding. One of the questions that I guess it shows up on your diagram here somewhere, when there's a work order, and you guys didn't really touch on this, but just a work order for just, routine maintenance. I know a couple of us last year got a couple of emails about some benches that were paid for, and they were kind of wondering when they were showing up. And how do you typically order those, those work orders? What's the priority, or how do you prioritize those?
Okay, a routine work order would actually go through the facilities department.
Okay.
But as far as purchasing a bench, the facilities department would receive that work order and then work with our buyer over in the purchasing department and get those purchased.
Okay. So, I mean, how do you prioritize those somehow, or?
Oh, I'm sorry, that was part two. Yes, sir. Every day at about 6:30 in the morning, we get an email. Alan Bassam and I get an email for, what electrical systems or mechanical systems are down. And obviously, not trying to be funny, but, smoking, sparking, or leaking, that takes priority. Okay, and then everything else kind of falls in after that.
Okay. All right.
Other questions? Mr. Burdine.
I wanted to say thank you for the presentation. I like how you started as if we didn't know anything and then built upon it, because there's a lot of questions I had. I'm new to the process, and so I'm learning a lot as we go. In fact, I drive by Elementary 46 every day. It's in my neighborhood, and it's interesting to see how the process is coming along. But to Mr. Rosenthal's point, are we going to have a presentation or a management oversight about maintenance at another time, or?
Yes, sir. I do believe that's coming up. I don't know if it's in the first four. I don't believe it's in the first four.
I don't think it's in the first four. I don't believe it's in the first four.
Okay.
So we give Mr. Cleaver a year off, and then we'll bring him back to the
Well,
table.
I have 4 more opportunities.
That's true. That's true.
He has another opportunity this year with transportation.
That's right. He does
Excellent.
have it. We are only giving you a little time off. Right. He gets to come back with transportation first.
So we're doing transportation first.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right, Mr. Rice.
Thank you for the presentation. Very nice, very well prepared. It looks like a really good, solid process. But I do want to come back and ask you, what is the construction procurement method you're going to recommend going forward with the bond? Is it going to be construction manager at risk or CSP?
I think once we land on a program manager that's going to be working with us, I think that would be a collaborative decision to come to that conclusion, because there could also be some job order contracting in that. And one of the other things that Alan and I are working on is seeing if there's a way to stand up some sort of a way to do some self-perform some of this work, maybe some of the sidewalk work, some of the fence repair, some of the light repair work. Maybe there's a way we can self-perform some of that.
What about for the new schools?
My personal preference, and it's a preference, and at the end of the day, it's a preference. My personal preference is CMR, but there's CSP is also good. I would again, I would want to be on a team and be collaborative with whatever program manager we selected to come up with that recommendation.
I'm just thinking, I understand your position, but I'm concerned about having enough money to build all the projects.
Yes, sir.
I know you've expressed that concern to me, so I'm just thinking that with CM at risk, it costs a little bit more than with CSP.
It might. It could.
It did on elementary 46.
Well, that would, okay. A year passed and the bid came in higher. That is correct.
Yeah, $5 million higher, 33% higher. And so, and I just had one other question, and that is on this pay application that you have in here. I guess it's an example, but it's from August, and that was their first pay app, so they're invoicing for general conditions. But on that page 9.2.1, what is the pre-construction fee for? Is that for pre-construction services? It's $5,000. 9.21 under Division 1.
Yes, I believe, just from memory, yes, sir, that was what I believe they submitted.
Were they able to provide pre-construction services? I thought that was when we approved CM at risk, the drawings were already done. They'd already bid them one time, and so I'm just wondering what pre-construction services they were able to provide.
They took a cursory look at the drawings before they went out to bid. And I don't know if they
Mrs. Morris has something she'd like to add. Can you go to a microphone, please?
Well, had the drawings changed that much in 12 months? I mean, they were bid 12 months earlier for $15 million, and then 12 months later they came in. Well, we thought it was going to be $18 million. We knew it went up, but then it went up, another $2 million.
I'm sorry. I actually know the answer to this since I prepared the contract. Because in a CM at risk, they don't come to the table with their subcontractors. They have to go through the public statutorily required procurement process to put all of the trade packages together and complete the project manual to put out all the newspaper advertisements for the subcontractor proposals. A general contractor on a CSP would not have to do that. That technically is part of the pre-construction phase to handle the procurement for the owner to get all the sub-trade packages finalized, advertised on the street, review, evaluate, and recommend the subcontractor. So that's what the $5,000 was for.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
No further questions.
Thank you.
Pass the witness.
Pass the witness to Mrs. Toussaint.
Okay, I would like to also thank you guys because this book is very helpful for me. This has been a learning process for me as well. And Mr. Rice asked a couple of questions that I had, and just as a follow-up, do we have, well, first of all, I'd like to know, why is CMR your preference?
Because after we sign that GMP, they're at risk. They have to deliver that building for the price they say. So if something happens, or they miss something, or something's missing in those drawings, they have to make that right.
Okay, so is it, Mr. Rice mentioned that it can be more expensive. And is that on the front end, or is that on the back end?
I don't know. We'll have, maybe, I'm not sure. I don't know what he was referring to, but I mean, we know what the price is going to be on bid day. That's the bottom line.
And when is bid day in the process?
Bid day on 47, I believe, is in February, March.
It'll be for March, but they're already looking at.
Mr. Cooper.
I'm sorry, they're already looking at, to the point where we've had discussions with the contractor that if we get to a 90% or so construction drawings and they're comfortable, they'll be willing to sign a GMP. So that's,
90%.
that process helps schedules and things like that. But that's one of the advantages with the CMAR is that the contractor's working from the beginning of the project, and when they get to the point where we're 90% and the drawings aren't ready to go out, and they've worked enough with their subcontractors that they can actually sign they're willing to sign a contract for a GMP, not to exceed.
Not to exceed.
The other reason I like it is because these construction folks have relationships with these subcontractors that we don't have. I mean, we're a school district. We don't deal with these folks every day, and so they have relationships they're able to draw on. Even when we're doing constructability reviews and getting estimates, they can go to their prime contractors and ask questions and get questions answers that we really can't do in a CSP. We can't go out and solicit ahead of a bid.
Do we have experience doing CMRs in the past, or is it,
Yes, ma'am.
what have we done primarily?
I had a list recently, several of the 2007 bond projects, I believe, were CMR.
Okay.
I can't remember which ones in particular.
Okay, so I'm looking at 6.6, and this may not be the document I'm asking about, but do we have criteria in place or a checklist or something that we look at when we have a project that we can go down and say, this project is better suited for one or the other, and so that we have a firm foundation for that? Do we have that in place?
We have this kind of checklist here, we have this kind of information here, and then we make a recommendation and then bring it to y'all for consideration. So I would think that would be the ultimate check and balance. It would be y'all's approval or disapproval of the process.
Okay. I'm gonna switch gears for just a minute too. So I like how you broke it down into the various phases because it helps me organize things in my head. So, how does the design team interact with the program team between the design phase and the program phase? Because you talked about the program phase is where you get with Dr. Hill and curriculum, and you talk about what classrooms you need and what you need in the classrooms and sizes and location and various things like that. So how does that program team interact when we get to the design phase?
Okay, first of all, the program team is the architect and the consultants, and Fort Bend ISD. So when we start a project and we say, okay, we're going to do an elementary school and we want to do it with 1,200 students, let's say, we sit down with all the educators and talk about what we need in that school. We use our guidelines as a starting point, talking about administrative. Well, in 47, because of the size of the schools, much larger than other schools, and it's a two-story, which is not unusual, we have broken areas up to administrative staff can be in different parts of the building. So we discuss how that needs, here's the criteria, well, we may need another person here. So we talk that whole process. English, every classroom we talk about what their needs are. Here's what our program says science is going to be. Here's what math is going to be. And they discuss actual teaching education, criteria that we're looking at, projectors, so every room is discussed. It gets a lot more complicated, and I'll be very honest with you, when you get to high schools, because I've done a number of programming on high schools, and they can take weeks and weeks and weeks, because you're talking about every classroom and hallway and how you serve food and how many, lines there's going to be. So it's very detailed. Now, that's what we call programming. You're trying to figure out what is in every classroom, how the building needs to function, and more importantly, how the flow comes in. When students come in, how do they come in? Other after-hour activities. Are they gonna come through the gym or the cafeteria? So you actually
Right,
sit
flow.
down and talk about how we're gonna run this building. Just like, here's the principal of the school and how you're gonna do functions, after-hour functions. You talk about the whole process, just like you're in a school. After you get that, then you start really taking that information. This area of the building needs to be next to this. These need to be separate. Then you start doing what we call schematic design, where you actually sit down and put all those bubble diagrams on a sheet of paper.
Okay, so I was thinking through that, and I'm looking at the design for elementary 47, and this may be more of a programming question than it is a design and construction question. Because I was reading through some of the details that were in the programming charts that you gave us, and it talked about looking specifically at like our flight program and our resource rooms. And there were some things written on there that we needed to be sure those rooms were close to the other, the other children, the other classrooms. So my question is, when I look at elementary 47, I'm looking at the ground floor, and we have 2 flight classrooms that are in the second grade area, and then a resource room. And it appears that that's all we have on the first floor. So my question is just around, it doesn't look like we have like a first grade pre-K, a first grade flight room and resource room, a kindergarten flight room and resource room. We just have the 3 rooms that are designated on the first floor. So are we feeding kids from kindergarten, first, and second grade into those 3 rooms? Is that how we structure that?
They're not situated for, like, we don't have first grade resource only. We have a resource teacher who teaches first grade, second grade as they come in. And I believe one of the reasons it's on that first level is because, for example, with the flight class, we will have some physical needs. And I
Right,
believe
yes.
the special education buses and the pre-K buses are coming to the back entrance to disembark from their buses at that point, so it's not as far and they don't get congested in the parent traffic, if I'm not mistaken. Am I right?
That's correct. That's correct.
Yeah, and it looks like that's where the flight classrooms are located. So I guess one of the things I probably would just like to throw out there for consideration, having a child that has been pulled, for some of these classrooms, because there's one resource classroom at the end of the second grade hall, which means any child from kinder, first, or second grade has to go to that resource room for any pullout that they get. And I know from experience that it can take away instruction time for how far it is. It can, plus when you're grouping kids in various grade levels, sometimes that can hinder instruction in the classroom. I've had some firsthand experience with that. And I see the same thing is done on the second floor. So we've got third, fourth, and fifth grade with one resource room that's kind of in the fifth grade pod. So, so one of the things I just would like for us to consider is potentially putting those rooms within the pods so that the kids can have, because we did have that experience in Abby's third grade year where the room was right within the pod. It helped cut down on losing instruction time. That teacher was there in case anything needed to, transpire between the general education classroom and the resource room, and it just made for a better sort of flow instructionally. So that's why I was asking that, because as I was reading through that, it never occurred to me that this comes in at the design and construction phase, so.
Was as a additional note to that, just to let everybody know that when we do programming that we talked about earlier, of the educational end and how transportation works and everything, when we get to this phase and we start doing our schematic designs, we go back to the education group and we present that, and we just don't take programming and that's it. we always go back to education and rethink the process, relook at it to see if there's any tweaking or adjusting we need to make before we get into the design development stage. So we want to, and even when we get past that and we start getting further down the line with real dimensions and everything, it's still a good idea to go back in and just make sure the flow and people haven't, come up with a different thought process.
That's good. I think that that's very helpful. And I think that would be something good for us to look at, just to make things a little easier on the teachers and probably the kids as well.
Dean is here, and he's been hosting those meetings, and we have been making adjustments, and we can look at that. For example, we had Suzanne come in, and we did make some changes to the library as far as where the circulation desk was and the flow of students there. And based upon her recommendations, they did change some design features. And so we can certainly look at that too.
Good.
Mr.
Thank
Asad.
you. Thank you
And
guys
how
very
do we
much.
record those things? So we go through this process for this school, and do we record those changes and those ideas? And is that giant binder you have, or it goes someplace else?
They get bigger than this.
I know they.
No, we have a complete detailed set of meeting notes. Dean has done an excellent job in tracking that, and the architects actually comply all the educational forms. So it's very similar to that document that I showed you as a checklist for design and construction. It gets into that type of detail of the discussion and what was decided, how many classrooms of this, and
But how do those ideas get carried to the next school, and the next school, and the school after that?
That's the process we need to hone in on and take that documentation and make sure it gets in that documentation.
Okay, so the place for that is in the ed specs, which is that binder. And so, because that was one of my questions, how are we developing that process to revise that? We're in a situation now where we're building 2 schools, bam, bam, and we're looking at building some more and fixing a lot of other stuff. So it seems to me that that's a key process we need to get in place, because otherwise we're not being as efficient as an organization as we could be. We use lost time by having to reinvent continued meetings, et cetera, for multiple personnel. So thank you for
we
nodding when I'm
agree.
saying that.
That's correct.
We agree, because you spend all that valuable time with a lot of people that have a lot of good ideas and experiences. We need to bring that back in and update our process as far as the education. We also are doing that really as processes change or issues occur during construction. I've already have a number of red lines on the construction end that we've already starting to develop.
Right, so I'm looking forward to hearing about that process and about those changes being made, because to me, that's critical to being an efficient organization. Sorry to interrupt you, Ms. Tossan.
Thank you
finished?
guys for answering the questions. Do we include teachers in that design process, like teacher input?
I believe they were included in that process. We haven't brought any teachers into this particular process for elementary 47, though.
But
no,
in
ma'am.
creating the
I
ed
believe that's
specs?
correct, yes, ma'am.
Okay, that's good, because I think particularly in that area with kids that need to be pulled out various times, whether it's just for testing or whatever, I know that in some schools, they actually try to leave a classroom empty to be able to do that. So if we were to plan for that, I'm sure that would help them as well.
Absolutely. I think a update to the design guidelines would be a focus group of some sort with the folks sitting at this table, some principals, maybe a librarian, a nurse, some teachers to talk
Excellent.
through that stuff.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Great. Mr. George, do you have a question or comment?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for putting together this binder. That kind of remind me how little I know about commercial level construction. It's a learning curve for me. I'm pretty new here. I like to emphasize on that also, the campus level input, because end of the day they are going to be there. They are the one who's going to be there. We could design and I believe they all have. They can give you a better understanding about And I completely agree with Grail James and also Christian on that. If we have a system in place, that would be good. One question is, this is a process, obviously, and how often you will be, is there any update the board is going to receive? Let's say you're building elementary 47. So the phases, okay, we are on phase 1 or phase 2, or is there any update you're going to be giving to the board occasionally, or if there is one, how often that is going to be?
Yes, sir. The Bartlett Cock, the construction manager, each month when they turn in their pay app is going to give us a monthly breakdown of what's occurred, a narrative of such a quality that we can post it online and also provide to y'all in an update.
Okay. And also, when it comes to, orderly manner we complete this process. And I like some of this tab 9, especially 923, the project application summary, which is, I thought it's a very good, piece of the puzzle, like I thought it is very interesting. And also, and you mentioned something about the future considerations, page number 12, I believe. And one item I have a lot of interest in, or concerns or question, is the small business initiative. Can you explain that a little bit? What does that exactly mean? What do you mean by that?
We have another item, a whole separate agenda item coming up on that one.
Oh, okay.
Yes, sir.
So I will wait. Okay, thank you, appreciate it. And I think and this is a phenomenal job, and I'm really impressed how neatly you laid out this, and it gives a person like me a lot of learning to do, but it make it easy to understand what you're trying to do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Rosenthal?
I have one other question. I see I'm listening to the discussion about the CMR, and I see the concerns, and I understand your point that I think it may reduce some variability, by the relationships, and I think that is important. I'm just kind of wondering when Bartlett Cock comes back with their GMP, and you determine that, and it's a lot higher than what we thought, what happens next at that stage? Do we go kind of issue another RFQ or whatever, or do we negotiate with them, or?
Well, couple of points there. We'll know way before GMP what the price is looking like, and that's one of the main reasons why CMR is a good method, because we kind of get updates as we go. But I think we talked about it, excuse me, a couple of board meetings ago, that yes, we're at the end, but we do not have to issue a GMP. At that point, we can basically kill the contract and go a different method if we do not settle on a GMP.
What are other districts, other fast growth districts doing with regard to this? Are they using the construction manager at risk, or CSP, or what's going on out there?
It varies. There's all varieties out there. I've said this before, but not the attorney general, but the comptroller didn't do us any favors by producing all of these wonderful cost per square foot that were done during like 2007 and 2008 when the economy was down. And so it's all over, the people do it all different ways. CMR, CSP, those primarily the two.
Well,
Go ahead, Mr. Rice.
Mr. Cleaver, I'm not opposed. I do appreciate all the hard work you and your staff have put into this. But I'm just looking at this matrix which you included in our binder, and it's comparing competitive seal proposal and construction manager at risk. And it says in the most competitive category, that's competitive seal proposal. over construction manager at risk. And for the likelihood of higher quality, they're both in there. If we have a critical timeline and possible early construction start, that's when you would use construction manager at risk. But it's my understanding from the last presentation, we were going to get the GMP after 100% CDs. And so that precludes an early construction start. So to me, that negates this one advantage. Least risk to owner, they're both marked in there. Less defined scope, construction manager at risk works better, but we've got a 3.5-inch binder of ed specs and a lot of programming, so I think we have a fairly well-defined scope. Complex project, that's better for CM at risk, but I don't think this is a complex project. It's a greenfield site, and so I'm just straightforward project. CSP works better. Early contractor input, I grant you that for construction manager at risk, and then maintains AE checks and balances with owner. Both of them work, and negotiation is allowed prior to award. Both of them work for that. So I'm not opposed to CM at risk. I just think that we're in a market right now where I know it's hard to get an early GMP because the subs don't want to bid and hold their prices for 3 months while we finish up the drawings, and so we're getting better prices. And to your point, when we have a GMP and we're moving forward and they have to build it for that, we're carrying a $500,000 owner project contingency in this 46 right now. So if there's something out of the scope, that some unforeseen condition or something that got left out, we're still going to give them a change order for that. We can't make them build something that wasn't in the drawings. And there's never was a perfect set of drawings. So whether it's CSP or whether it's CM at risk, to me, I think right now CSP is more competitive. That's just what I think. You need to make the recommendation to us, but I am concerned going forward. I know prices are up. They're up a lot. And I just ask you to take that into consideration when we go forward. I think that the CM at risk didn't work that well on 46 because we knew prices were going to go up. We went from 15, we approved 18 million, and it went up even more. It went up $2 more million. So that's my concern. I know on 47, if we can't get there, we can terminate the contract, shake hands, put it out for CSP if we want to. I just ask you to please keep that in mind going forward on the others. Thank you.
Absolutely.
And I'll just add to that, I think we really rely on your objectivity in evaluating the best procurement method for these things, just like we do from anything that we're doing. So we appreciate all this documentation and the checklists and the way that, the way you've walked us through it. And, we'll look forward to going forward with the next set of projects. But just realize that we're relying on you and your objectivity so that in case you're more comfortable with one area or another, that may be because of your experience. I'm not sure the right path forward, but I'm just mentioning that. The last thing I wanted, I had one other question. You brought up something about building commissioning. And you said that you sort of talked about it like maybe that was going to happen or it wasn't going to happen. Is that our normal practice to do a building commissioning? Or what's our experience with that? Or what do we normally do?
It is on the lead buildings. I do not believe that in the past that building commissioning was done on our Fort Bend.
Correction, it was. It was
was.
instituted on Bowie Middle School.
Okay, I'm
Yes.
on all our past
2000,
buildings, I'm sorry.
Just that one.
Just that one,
And then, yes.
okay.
Well, we've also been doing building commissioning in critical areas like HVAC.